Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders, where we bring in experts from their field of expertise and ask them what the best practices are historically, what they're seeing currently, and what do they expect the trends and themes to be in the near future. And today we've got sales leader Victor Antonio, who is a sales guru to say the least, been doing this for almost 20 years. I'll leave it up to him to kind of tell us a little bit about himself and what you're up to today.
So yeah, thank you for having me on the show, Chris. Really appreciate it. Yeah, a little background because the question I always get is the one we talked before, pre-interview here is that people always say, "So Victor, why'd you become an engineer? And then from engineer, how'd you get into sales?" And the big answer for the engineering part was it was the only profession I knew that was making money. My family's originally from Puerto Rico, and I was born and raised in Chicago, so first generation. And so I have that sad story that food stamps, government cheese, powdered milk from the inner city of Chicago, and my mother was go to school, get the job, make some money. And I remember asking my instructor, I'm not joking about this, my high school, counselor. I said, who makes the most money? And he goes, well, he says doctors, engineers. I said, oh, engineers. What about engineers? And I remember looking at, and I'm not making this up, these bingo cards where you can, rip them off the board and send in for information back in the day. And I remember because there was no internet. And I remember they had civil engineering, and I'm like, no, I don't know what that is. Aeronautic, aerospace engineer. I'm like, Puerto Rican in space. I'm not feeling that. Mechanical engineer. I thought they fixed cars. And I saw electrical engineer. I'm like, yeah, that's it. And I asked my teacher, do they make a lot of money? He says, yes, they do. And that's actually how I decided my engineering degree. The other thing was that if I didn't do a degree, go to college, my mother says you'll have to go work with your father at the factory. And so my primary motivator has always been fear.
Hmm.
And I tell people this all the time. I said, fear is a great motivator. If used correctly and focused correctly, it's a great motivator. So I got into engineering, went to school, graduated, get to corporate America. And I'll just keep this part short. What happened was after 3 or 4 years, I think I had my first like existential crisis.
Okay.
It was interesting, Chris. 3 years into the gig, it took me 5 years to get my engineering degree. And 3 years into this job, I'm working for Honeywell, great company. I'm working for their electronic test center, testing components, all the components that go into the armaments for the military. And I remember 3 years into this, I'm having that moment where I'm sitting in the cubicle
Hmm.
and I'm going, what did I just do? Now
Yeah.
I'm making money. Here's the interesting thing. I'm making money, right? So I'm satisfied. Check that box.
Yeah.
Financially stable, check that box. But I'm not happy. And I don't know why I'm not happy. But I do know that I don't want to do this anymore. Now, here's what really messed with my head was I just spent 5 years trying to get a degree and got it. I just spent 3 years working at a job that I thought I wanted. I just spent 8 years of my life. And if we use the theory of opportunity cost, that's really 16.
Yeah.
So in other words, and that's a lot of sunk cost, right? And I remember I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I know that this job was depressing.
Hmm.
Sitting in front of oscilloscope, testing components was not my thing. And so that's when I became like an avid reader. And I started reading like anything I can get my hands on. The first audio program I had was Earl Nightingale, Lead the Field. And I started reading all those people, right? Like Earl Nightingale, Jim Bronin, Watley, I forgot his first name, Dennis Waitley, those folks. And that's when I discovered motivation. I started reading philosophy and things of that nature. And little by little, I just said, you know what? I just need to start moving. I read the book, and I'm sorry for the long answer, but there's a point here. Is that when I read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, there's a chapter in there that talks about, because I think the book is like 3 decades now, if not
Yeah.
more. But remember the circle of influence and the circle of concern. The circle of concern, I believe, the things you can't control. So
Yeah.
you focus on the circle of influence, things you can control. And that for some reason, that wouldn't click. And I said, okay, what can I control? Well, I know I don't like this. So what I can control is my attitude towards it, but let's begin looking at something else. So at that point, I started kind of searching different fields. And I moved around from company to company looking for something. And then I came across sales.
Hmm. Got it. What about sales specifically intrigued you?
Money again. And I say that to people. People have this like reaction to it all the time because like, what do you mean? What happened was that we had just had our first child, right? A year and a half into this thing. My wife says, she's working, she got her degree, she's working. And she says, I'm just not feeling right about letting somebody else raise our child. Right. And so keep that in mind. So my wife said, is there any way we can find a way for me to stay home? Right.
Hmm.
And as an engineer, you're getting your 3% raise a year, if that. That's not going to work. Now, around that time, another thing happened. I designed this wireless. I was looking for a wireless company at this point, and I designed this beautiful wireless system, $5 million project. We won the project, right? The salesperson name was Ken Cook. Ken Cook takes me out to lunch, the whole thing, and I tell the story how he takes me out to lunch. I'm all happy. I come back. I'm all excited because the sales guy just took me out to lunch because we won our first big system. And this guy named Roy Cole comes up to me and says, Victor, what are you so happy about? I said, I said, my system just sold, right? And the sales guy took me out to lunch. And to keep the story even shorter, he said, well, Victor, let me ask you a question. How much money did it spend on you?
Hmm.
I said, on that lunch. And I said, like, I don't know, $50, I think, something like that. And then, then he says, oh, interesting. How much commission do you think he made off of your design?
Hmm.
And I said, what? Because I had not thought about that, right? I'm like, I don't know. He says, well, it's a $5 million system. I assume first phase, he's probably going to make like $50,000. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And he walks away.
Hmm.
And at that point, I realized, and then it's life is always like a confluence of things going on, right? And at that not at that very moment, but within that time frame, let's say a month or two, they needed a salesperson for Latin America. So my wife is saying, is there any way we can make more money? I just realized salespeople make more money. They need a salesperson for Latin America. I speak Spanish. I have the technical background. Why not try it?
Yeah,
And then I just said, let me take the opportunity. And sometimes it's just timing, man.
absolutely. Um, and when you kind of got into that first sales role, what were some of the things that obviously you're kind of like learning trial by fire, you've
Mhm.
been reading all this kind of stuff. Uh, but obviously being in it, what were some of the things that surprised you that either you're really great at that kind of organically fit with that sales role?
Mm.
And then some of the things that you felt like were not innate in you and you actually had to learn.
So what's happening in the background during all this time, uh, you know, we like to think that life is a straight line, but things are happening, in parallel. Life is not serial, right? Now, around that time frame, I saw Zig Ziglar speak. I got
Yep.
tickets to a peak performance thing in Minnesota, and I went to see this guy, and I'm like, look at this guy on stage. And I saw how he moved and everything. I'm like, one day I want to do like that. And that's like circa 93, right? And it was after that, somebody said, hey, you should join Toastmasters
Mm,
to learn how to become a better speaker. I'm like, what is that? And we learned how to become a better speaker. And so I joined Toastmasters. And in that Toastmasters organization, there were two speakers. Chris, they were so good. I would just in awe of them when they would speak. And I go, I got to be like this guy. So my goal was to beat them in the competitions that were held every year. So I did Toastmasters for about 3 years, and I kept really working on the craft. And it got to the point that people started knowing me for my presentation skills. Then I had the technical skills. In other words, I can talk engineer. I can do demos. I can go on the board and draw, system designs. And then on top of that, I could speak Spanish. And that to me was like the Holy Trinity right there. All those three things came together. And so the first thing I realized in sales is that you have to be the subject matter expert. You really have to understand what it is you do and what you sell, but not only just understand the product, Chris. This is where I think people get it wrong. I know a lot of people who are domain experts, understand the product, but they don't understand how it impacts the actual buyer or how it can help them.
yep.
And I always say, customers are, any B2B company, enterprise company, any B2B, there's three things they care about. How do I increase revenue, reduce cost, or expand market share, or all the above, right? I call that the value trinity, right? And if I can't tie what I offer, what I sell to any one of those three, if not all three, I'm not selling value.
Yeah.
Then I just regress to selling on price.
Hmm.
And so that was the first thing that, I learned that what made me good out of the gate was I was a subject matter expert. People were surprised that I could actually go there. By the way, I should back up. Back in the day, and they maybe still do it today, if you were an engineer, you went on a four-legged call. By
Hmm.
four-legged call, you were always with the sales guy, just like
Yeah.
I was with Ken Cook, right?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't now. I'm the sales guy. I don't need engineer. They're like,
Hmm.
what? You're going to do the presentation? I can't tell you how many times I got that look like, you're going to do it, but you're the sales guy. I go, I know. And I would do the presentation. It goes, instant credibility. right? So that was one of the biggest aha moments for me. If I know the product and I can demo it and not just be the talking, the mouthpiece in sales, that made all the difference in the world. Around that time, and I'll just tie it with this one because this layers over it nicely. Domain expertise. The guy that I modeled was a guy by the name of Jose Santana. He was like from the Canary Islands, right?
Yeah.
And he had this deep voice. He used to talk like Ricardo Montalban. He would say my name and it would sound like Victor, ¿cómo estás? It's a beautiful, deep, rich voice, right? I would watch this guy when I would just do calls with him because he would let me tag along. And I've never seen that level of caring and charisma before.
Hmm.
I mean, he'd walk into a building and everybody knew him. He would bring people things, just little things, tokens, cup of coffee for the guy, the security guard, right? He'd go upstairs, he'd have something for the secretary. When he came in, he was so welcomed because he was never trying to hard sell anybody. He was always just showing up to say, I just want to show you a couple of things we got going on, some new things. And customers loved him. And that's where I learned the art of charisma. And when I put that engineering degree together, I put the actual ability to speak, slapped on some charisma, man, that right there, that was the winning combination.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. This whole Toastmasters and all that, was that prior to the sales role and kind of like you were doing these things just out of your own pure interest?
Yes, pure interest. I was doing it at that time. I was still an engineer, an application
Yeah.
engineer.
Yeah.
And so it was something I wanted to do
Yeah.
because I'd seen Zig Ziglar. And I said, I
Yeah.
want to be that good. I never thought, I didn't make the connection right away that this is going to help me accelerate my career. I didn't make
Yeah.
that connection.
Got it.
Right? But I tell people today,
Yeah.
who want to be speakers, I said, go to Toastmasters,
Yeah.
go through the process.
Interesting. I mean, to
And
me,
if I can add this, because I want something tangible for Walkway, the reason I love Toastmasters, I'll be very specific why it's a great program. You have to master 5 to 7 minute speeches, right? They give you 10 5 to 7 minute speeches. Any long keynote is a series of 5 to 7 minute modules. And if you learn how to do 5 to 7 minute modules, you can weave a great story together. When you're doing a presentation, any presentation in business, it's about weaving 5 to 7 minute modules. Each module has an impact. And once you weave that story together, you become very powerful.
absolutely. I mean, 1000% agree. Um, yeah, whether that's been a conscious or subconscious effort, I think that's something that's ingrained into me in terms of like
Mm.
how we run anything from, an initial conversation to like a demo itself. This is all limited to that 5 to 7 minute mark. Uh,
Yes.
that being said, you now spent better part of almost 2 decades in sales, right?
Mhm.
What was like that first few years? Obviously, I think that the thing that really kind of like unlocks this for me in terms of understanding now your background is that innate curiosity to really have been a strong public speaker
Mhm.
that's not trained typically in majority. I think of like the engineering personality,
Mhm.
perhaps. Obviously, your motivators were maybe outside of just being great at that domain, and it was a little bit more driven financially as well, and your personal
Mhm.
background and then current experience at that time. Um, but all those things combined together, as you mentioned, a confluence of different variables in
Mhm.
life that happens, to then now you're in this role. What was the first 5 years like for you in terms of like really to me, it's already seems like you try to be, you're always already trying to attempt to be the best at whatever it is. So
Mhm.
what are you trying to do in those first 5 years to really become the best at your game, in that short amount of time?
I, you know, That's a great question because I'm thinking there were two things going on. I'm trying to be a great father on one
Yeah.
hand, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
raising kids, right? And I'm also trying to, I'm not sitting there like thinking about this, like, okay, this is what I want to do with my career. I'm just trying to hit my quota
Yeah.
every year,
Yeah.
right? Because every year, and I'm working this thing backwards. How do I go after the business? What deals do I have to get? How many deals do I have to get? And then how do I hold on to an existing business? How do I grab new business? I'm going through what everybody goes through,
Yeah.
trying to figure out a plan. And for me, it was always about key account management, that
Mm.
there were certain key accounts that I knew if I kept these key accounts happy, they would not only buy from me, but continue to buy from me.
Yeah.
And so I always thought, let me keep my key accounts. obviously you prospect for new accounts, but I had I call them my tier ones. And the tier ones, I just babysat,
Yep.
and I tried to get new business on the side, obviously. In that tier one, and this I didn't know till later on, is that, and I wrote a book called Mastering the Upsell around this. And one of the data points in there that I thought was interesting, studies show that if you just focus on existing customers, you can grow your revenue by up to 30%.
Yep.
Now, I didn't know that piece of data till later, but that's exactly what I try to do with these key accounts. How do I get more wallet share? How do I get more business? And that's what I started doing. I
Yeah.
would actually come up with opportunities that they
Yeah.
had not thought about. In other words, I would say, hey, look, I just saw what these other companies are doing. Have you thought about doing this? And I would bring something to the table. And obviously they knew I was trying to sell more of my product. So that was one way I actually increased sales. The other one was that I learned to partner with other suppliers. So even though I wasn't the prime contractor at times, so in other words, if there's a big RFP, I knew I wasn't the prime contractor. I would bring in the right teams or the right companies. We'd figure this out and we'd go after the business together. So I had this set of tools of working with people and bringing them in together. Call it the charisma piece or the presentation. Look, I got this deal. Here's what I think we can do with it. And that was my mindset. But the
Yeah.
whole thing was, how do I hit my number so I don't get fired?
Yeah. Going back to that fear motivator, right? I think like,
Yeah.
to me, I think, I'm a big like fan of like David Goggins' mindset of
Mm.
kind of like, resetting to ground zero kind of thing, which is I think you tend to become the most creative in your most scrappiest, most kind of like dire times of like
Oh, yeah.
when your back's against the wall and you have to like fight your way through. You become super, super creative because
Dude.
there's
Yeah.
the alternative
Yeah.
is like, I'm not going to eat or I'm not going to be able to feed my family. And it's like
Yeah.
that fear
I
that's
get
so
creative. By the way, it's so interesting. I was talking to my wife this morning about this. I said I am at my most creative,
mm,
like in the most. I go into full hunt mode.
yeah.
When I feel something closing in on me. You
Mm,
know what I mean? Where my
yeah.
back's up against the wall. It's just like I naturally, and it's that fear of going back.
Yeah.
And
Thousand.
so I don't crumble under pressure. And I'm not trying to brag, but that just for some reason it's if it's pressure's coming like this, it just pushes me up like this, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I think a lot of salespeople are driven kind of like really successful ones are driven in that way. I think that the ones that really kind of surpass the norm are the ones that are able to do it healthily because like that's the other part of it, right? It's like
Yeah.
trying to find the balance because you can't always go
Mm,
back to zero. I mean, you got to find the different ways to motivate yourself where that
mm,
that 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 chip is still always existing some way, some shape or form. What is that? I mean, how has that evolved for you? I mean, obviously, like you're not in the same position as you were back then,
mm,
but maybe the fact
mm.
that you are this, you're building your own solo empire now of,
Yeah.
and there's always going to be those challenges because as a
Yeah.
solopreneur and trying to build your credibility, your speaking engagements, all that stuff, it's always a constant leveling up. And as
Yeah.
I've interviewed quite a few like influencers in that world
Mm.
of entrepreneurship, and yeah, it's there's no top, right? And there's always
There is no
somebody
top.
you're
There
right
is no
behind
top.
you. So how do you, yeah, how do
Go
you
ahead. I'm
look at
sorry.
it? How do you frame it? So for you kind
It,
of keep
it,
pushing forward.
it's funny because all throughout high school, all throughout college, I would never complete a book. I'd
Mm,
skim it and then take the test. I got to be honest, right? That's what I would do. It wasn't until I had that existential crisis and I started reading, that 3 years into the
yeah,
job, I'm like, what am I doing? And I started becoming this voracious reader. And then what I started doing was I would notice what other people were reading. If I'd walk into my boss's office, he's reading Good to Great, I'd go buy the book, Good to Great. Whatever people were reading, I started reading. And what begins to happen, and you can't teach this, it has to be this natural curiosity to want to find out what other people are doing. And
yeah,
somewhere, I don't know what happened, Chris. I got to be honest, I don't know what happened. I became this reading monster. And then so I would read, and then I'd get up. Typically, I get up at like 2 in the morning. It's just kind of a habit. And then I just read for an hour because at 2 in the morning is when I used to get up for my exams to read. At 2 or 3 in the morning, I could absorb. For some reason, my retention's real high at 2 or 3 in the morning. And then I go right back to bed and then get up at 5, type of thing. And it is that reading. Because again, if you don't read, the best analogy I have is that you're just moving furniture around in your brain.
yeah,
You know what I mean? You're just moving
Yeah,
furniture around, you know, working with what you got. When I come across new content, you know this already. I'm speaking to the choir. You know that new information pushes out bad information and just updates everything.
yeah,
And so when people say, "Well, Victor, how do you do it?" Because I get this question all the time: "How do you know about this? How do you know about that?" I'm like, "I read, I watch
yeah,
video, I listen to audio." I'm just like, because something is, you know, Chris. Sometimes I think maybe my childhood, I must have had some trauma where I was like behind the eight ball, and I always feel like I need to know.
yeah, yeah.
And so I think there's some trauma there. I couldn't identify it. Maybe if I go under hypnosis, I can come up
Yeah,
with it.
I think it's, I mean, to me, it's like there's probably like a sense of insecurity or like
Yeah,
lack of feeling good enough. And you, so to me, it's always like chasing an edge, right? Like for me,
I
it's like,
agree. I agree. Yes.
whether it's even these conversations, like I'm going into it learning not just for our audience, but for myself personally, and selfishly, I'm gaining out of it, and I think the funny thing is, as I've done these things and, we've kind
Mm,
of leveled up on the types of talent we've been able to attract, you realize that, people that you don't think would talk to you will actually talk to you because a lot of the times they're also in that same mindset of,
mm,
hey, I could learn from somebody. I could learn from this
mm.
conversation. I could learn from somebody that I don't even think I could learn from. And I think a lot of those like really impressive leaders are always in that, like, I'm always listening and I'm always trying to keep my pulse open to things. And so they're willing to have conversations because they're never sure where that next piece of information is going to come from, where they're
Yeah.
going to crowdsource that edge, right? And I think that's maybe where that reading thing comes from. I was the same way in just like high school. Couldn't
Mm,
You give me structure and you tell me you have to read something
mm.
for the sake of reading it, not going to do it.
Right.
But like if I'm like have some natural born curiosity towards it, or I like it's involved in my world, shape, or form, and I feel like if I pick that
Mm,
up, or if I observe something that somebody else is doing and I picked up that habit, then it's gonna give me an edge.
yeah.
I'm just on it, you know,
Yeah.
madman,
No,
right?
you just reminded me. I came up with this phrase, and I'll explain the phrase. I said the toughest road to success is the road back to you.
Hmm.
Right? The toughest road to success, the road back to you. And here's what I mean is that when you're young, think of it, you know, you have to go back to when you were a kid, you were just more free, right?
Yeah,
And then through elementary school, through high school, through college, this layering of what you should be, these expectations of what you have to do, what you should be like, right? And then you realize that part of that unhappiness I had was this wasn't me. You know, I even if you've seen my speaking style, it's very different
yeah,
because I like to have fun on stage. Because one day I decided that's not me.
yeah,
And when I say the toughest road to success is the road back to you, it's becoming that authentic you and not being afraid of it.
yeah,
You know, I love, for example, I always use Gary Vaynerchuk as an example because Gary, you know, dropping F bombs everywhere.
sure.
Not, I wouldn't do that. That's him. And the
Yeah,
reason I like put content aside, the fact that he goes, this is me. And you can tell that that's him, you know,
yeah.
24/7, 365. You look at Tony Robbins, that's him. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? You look at when I see that authenticity, I don't see that in a lot of people sometimes. There's always this facade, and you can kind of feel it sometimes. Can't quantify it, but it's like, you know it when you see it.
Yeah.
And one of the things I learned to do is stop comparing myself to other people.
Hmm.
And I know we say that becomes real obvious, right? But we do it
Yeah.
because the brain is like that. It's that amygdala, that primal part of your brain is in survival mode. And it says, maybe you should do it like that because it's working for Chris. And it takes effort to fight that monkey brain to say, no, that's not me. That's Chris. That's how he does it. How do you do it, Vic? How do you want to do it? And then believe in yourself that much and then become successful doing that. That's hard.
Yeah.
That is hard to be courageous enough to do it your way and bet on yourself. You know what I mean? That's hard.
Yeah. I think that's as you're saying that, I do feel like that's the key ingredient to making a junior or even like a mid-level salesperson,
Mm,
the difference between somebody like that and then somebody that becomes a sales leader, right? I think a
yeah.
sales leader has to become that level of self-awareness that you're
Yeah.
talking about. And it's different for everybody. I think like, in terms of how they get to that level of self-awareness, because only after that self-awareness can you actually be authentic and genuine. And then that rubs off the same way towards whoever it is that you're talking to, because no longer does it feel to that
Yeah.
buyer that you're trying to sell, but you're actually being, to me, like two words that I always use across sales: compassion and empathy. Like
Yeah.
those things become organic and innate in the way that you speak to them, and it's
Yeah.
no longer feels like somebody that's just trying to one-sidedly
Yeah.
gain out of a conversation. So
I was going to ask you is, when we talk to like SaaS, I get a lot of, SaaS folks, and they're always like, I get this question. Tell me if you get this question. Victor, script or no script? All right.
yeah,
And I said, all right, let me, and I always break it down. No, later. There's a phrase called shuhari. I don't know if you're familiar with shuhari. Shuhari is shuhari, three-part, right? The first part is you copy the form.
hmm
That's the shu part. The ha means you begin to bend the form. And then the re part is you break from the form and you find your form,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so that shuhari part is what people don't get. I copy, Chris is successful. Here's what he does. Let me copy the form. That's the shoe part. Then I
sure,
go, I'm not comfortable. I'm not feeling the way he says it. Let me bend a couple of things. And then you break away from that. And I think the ability to do that, to become yourself, is the first step in, let's say, moving into a leadership level. Because
yeah,
if you can't be you and you're always somebody else, it doesn't work.
yeah,
And I think a lot of young salespeople are afraid to be themselves. On the
yeah,
phone, I can hear it. When they're trying to sell me, I can tell they're reading a script or they're holding back.
yeah,
They should just trust themselves, as they say, into the breach, right?
yeah,
Trust yourself to say, I can have this conversation and I can just use the scripts as guide. And I
yeah,
think when you get back to trusting yourself enough and being courageous enough to do it your way, I think that's when you start experiencing, in my opinion, success, which I don't define as about money, wealth. It's about, dude, you're doing it your way, how
yeah,
you do it, and you're doing well. And
yeah.
that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the trick. I mean, to me, I deal with a lot of like founder, like earlier stage companies are founder-led sales teams, and then they're trying to create process
Mm,
for bringing on a sales team, right? And
mhm,
what typically happens is there's a disconnect, and you almost have to like
mm,
discount what you expect out of a sales team versus what a founder-led team is going to do, just because
mhm.
of the fact that they could speak, talk about domain expertise. They're going to be
Mhm.
the ones that speak most intelligently around the product because
Right.
they're also building it at the same time.
Yep.
And so, that being said, script, no script, it's like you got to give them something, because you got to give them some understanding of what success looks like and the process of what's been successful.
Mm.
But then, like how you mentioned, you have to find your own way to do it. I'm curious, like, if there's any bits of advice, I mean, I have not been able to figure out that part, which is you take a junior salesperson, and I don't think it's just knowing the product backwards and forwards. I don't think it is about building up that self-confidence
Mhm.
so that they can speak confidently around whatever it is that they're talking to.
Right.
But some of that is like that natural curiosity to like want to learn the ins and outs of
Mhm.
sales, to want to know the ins and outs of how do I become more of a confident speaker, to know the ins and outs of the product, or like the even like to me, you talked about before is like really understanding the impact on the buyer, right? It's like
Yes.
those three variables about like increasing top line revenue or
Right.
improving margins, those are to me like table stakes, right? Every
Right.
SaaS product or B2B service is supposed to
Mhm.
do one of those three things. If
Right.
it doesn't, you're already like at a loss. But then it's also then understanding and be able to speak in the same terminology as the buyer. To me, it's so
Right.
important to understand that you can speak to that pain point that they're dealing with so that you get
Mhm.
that head nod or lean in instantaneously, and they feel like you've been in their role, that you've
Yeah.
had their job before.
Yeah.
How do you
And
how do you get somebody to buy into that?
it's, when I talk to salespeople, and I just had this conversation a couple of days ago, and we were talking about sales, and I remember the lady just pulled back a little bit,
Yeah,
uh, because I said the word sales, and I said, and I'm gonna tell you what you already know, but then I'll explain the layer that's beneath it.
yeah,
I said, you're not selling. I said, you understand if you just stop selling
yeah,
and just try to really help them. And
yeah,
you can only help them by first understanding your product or service and then understanding their business. What if you didn't care about closing the deal? How would you talk to them? Like literally, how would you talk to that person? So if I really care about you, one of the things Kim Scott wrote a book called Radical Candor. And I love that book because it talks about if you care about your client, don't be afraid to challenge them, especially if you know they're making a bad move. If you know that you have a great product, your product can really help their business grow, and you can't sell with that type of energy, that type of compassion and commitment, they can feel it. Then it's just the presentation.
Yeah.
So, the domain expertise gives you the ability to, I guess, increase your confidence, because I
Yeah.
always say you have to be able to sing the song. If I wake you up out of dead sleep and I ask you a question, you should be able to answer it. If I say, let me think about it, you should be able to respond right away. If I say, I'm happy with my current supplier, what would you say? Which is what I do to salespeople all the time. If you can do these things, you're walking into a conversation with that confidence. Now, here's a second layer. And this I learned from Michael Gerber's book, E-Myth, right? If you remember in the E-Myth, he talks about systems and processes. And he talks about McDonald's, right? How they have a process. It's a consistent process all throughout. But there was something he said in the book that was just like, whew, my head just blew open. He said, never work in your business, work on your business. I don't know if you remember that line, if you read the book. If you
I
work
have that.
in the business, you have to be there. If you work on your business, you don't have to be there. In other words, you have systems and processes in place that the thing can run without you. So never work in it, work on it. Having said that, when you're in a presentation, let me move this over to a presentation or a demo. Never be in the presentation, be on the presentation. Here's what I mean by this. When you know your content, when you know what you're going to say, when you know what they're going to say, because you've done it enough, you've talked to enough people, you've talked, by the way, this is one of the best training. Go to the product managers. If you're a salesperson, find you the product manager, the software engineer, the app engineer, and let them beat the crap out of you with questions till you can't answer, and then you figure it out. And then you answer them. And again, they'll tell you what you're saying or what you should say. I would always go to product managers. Here's the product. Here's my presentation. What do you think? And I just get beaten up bad. I'd be bloodied. But do that several times, you know your product. Back to the presentation of the demo. Because I knew the product so well, and I knew every rebuttal I would get, because the product managers and the marketing managers told me, here's the pushbacks. Here's all the resistance you're going to get. So I had my scripts memorized for the product. I knew the product. I knew what they were going to say, what the pushbacks were. Now, here's where the magical part comes in. Because I knew that, when I was doing my presentation, I wasn't thinking about the presentation. I wasn't in it. I was on it. And by on it, I mean this. It was like having a third eye over that conversation. There's me, the other party or group, and then this third eye in my head monitors for any type of change in posture, body language shift, even tones or hiccups. If I ask a question, how do they respond? My brain alarms. If I ask you, based on what I've shown you, can you now see how this would help you? And if you said, I can see it, Victor, I keep going. But if you said, yeah, and I would hear that small, yeah, I would stop. And I said, Chris, it doesn't sound like what I just showed you convinced you that this will solve your problem. Can I ask why? What was the reason behind that hesitation? That's what the best do. They stop in a conversation. What was that? It's almost like, hey, what was that? But you can only do that when you're on the conversation, not in the conversation. In other words, on the presentation, not in the presentation. And the only way you can be on is to know the product, know what they're going to say in advance, because you've been there, you've done that, you've been bloodied with the responses already. You're not thinking about that. That's like subconscious already. And then that second part of your brain, almost like when do you play piano?
I
Like,
don't,
I
but
don't.
I mean, I was alluding to this in my mind, just muscle memory. The
Right.
idea of
So
muscle memory. Yeah.
what happens is your brain splits. Like when you first start playing piano, it's like your hands are like in sync, right? Left and right. But then something happens. Your left can do the bass and your right can do the treble, and you're carrying two tunes. It's no different with a presentation. One part's in the conversation, the other part's on the conversation. And that's what I've seen the best of the best do.
Yeah. I get it. Uh, I mean, it's that's like over preparedness to the point where it's just second nature. And by being in second nature mode, you can answer anything. That's all there. But what that allows you to free up is that third eye, that level of awareness of reading a
Yes.
room and reading the behaviors of the individuals in that room, so you
Mhm.
can catch the small things. It's not about how do I answer this question? It's not about how do I move to the next slide? It's I already have that backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
I'm looking for what you're saying and what you're doing, and if you're being authentic with me or not, because then
Right.
I can pick up on those things and maneuver through the content, maneuver through the deck or whatever it might be to get to the other things that
Yeah.
pull the pieces of that arsenal that's going to actually be of value, and it doesn't have to be in the linear way anymore.
Yeah.
But
By the way,
sorry.
I would argue that it's hard to be authentic during a presentation
Yeah, yeah,
when you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
right? It's hard because you're too busy. You're focused on the
Yeah, yeah.
presentation.
Yeah, you're being self-serving. You're still trying to figure it out for yourself, so you can't
That's
service
right.
them, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. What's
um,
the old adage? Never practice on your customers. That's the old adage, right?
exactly. I love that though. That's a great tip. I think a lot of SaaS sales people should be taking away from this is like get in front of your product manager and like have them poke holes at you. Like
Yes.
not
Yes.
not that is something I don't think a lot of people do, let alone think about doing. But if anything, that's a straight takeaway, actionable step that somebody should always do, and in order for them to be in that
Mm,
preparedness mode for sure.
yeah. And by the way,
Uh,
that builds confidence going in.
yeah,
This is what I just try to explain this to people. It builds this confidence
yeah,
that just it oozes out of you because you're not afraid.
yeah.
You know, can I tell you just a quick story, Chris? Because this
Sure.
is about preparedness. So I did a presentation. Well, I was supposed to do a workshop, right? And I had a 2-hour workshop, and this is for Wells Fargo, this big event they had in Nashville. And I remember they just gave me a 2-hour workshop. I wasn't the keynote speaker. I was one of the workshop people. 2, 3 in the morning. I think it was like 3 in the morning. I get a call, and I pick up the phone. I'll give you the short version. And this is all my wife hears because I pick up the phone. She hears, uh-huh, yeah, uh-huh. Okay. What time? Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll do it. And I hung up. And she goes, what was that? She goes, the event coordinator called me. They just lost their keynote speaker. It's like 3 in the morning. He says, can you be downstairs at 7 to kick off at 8 in the morning?
Hmm.
And she goes, and so I said, and she goes, and my wife knows me now. What happens is I can't sleep. I get up, I go into the shower, and what I do is I run a sequence in my head of because I have all these stories because I got my act together. I have content, and I literally weave my remember go back to Toastmasters. Let's do the callback. I weave my 5 to 7 minute stories to create a 45-minute pitch in my head. Right? It takes me about 45 minutes to an hour to do that. And so I go downstairs, run to the end. I get downstairs. They said, Victor, you don't have to do the full, 60 minutes. You could just do 30 or 45 minutes. I go, no, I'm good. I'll do the whole hour. Is that what you need? They go, yeah, we'd like the whole hour, but you don't have to. I said, okay. 5, 10 minutes go by. Somebody else comes by. So, Victor, I was just talking to Ann. She said, you want to do the 60. You don't have to do the 60. You can just do the 30 if you want. And then finally I said, yeah, so why do you keep asking me? I'm telling you I can do the 60, but you keep asking me to do 30 as if you want me to keep it short. She goes, well, and this is what she said to me. She goes, well, we have to admit, Victor, you weren't our first call.
Yeah.
You were like our third or fourth call. Every other speaker rejected it.
Hmm.
They said, because they didn't have time to prepare. You
Yeah.
said, you just said yes. And so I said, and so sure enough, I get up there, do the presentation, I kill it. How do I know I kill it? Because the senior VP of Wells Fargo literally said, and it did happen, walked over, thanked me profusely, says, looked at the coordinator, says, whatever you're paying him, just double it. Thank you, Victor. Walks off. My point to all this is that when you know your stuff, when you're
Mm.
prepared, you just prepared. You
Yep.
know your content.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. I do want to cover this last point here
Mm,
before we let you go, because you did write a book about this, Sales Ex Machina, right?
mm,
And it speaks it's some years back, but speaks to AI and as
right.
it relates to sales. Tell us a little about your your overarching philosophy on the topic. It's a
Mhm.
deep topic,
Real
but
deep topic. Yeah.
yeah. But let's cover it a little bit in terms of where did you start? When did you start seeing this as a possibility? How has that been proven? What aspects of that has been proven right or wrong
Yeah.
in current context with where AI is today? And then
Right.
where do you foresee it in the next few years?
So the background is one of my summer internships when I was in college was with Honeywell, and I worked for their undersea systems division on a torpedo system called the Mach 50. That was my first introduction to what they call rule-based expert systems. You would write out rules, and it was kind of an AI, primitive AI. And that was my first introduction to what that really was. 20 years go by, whatever it is, and you don't see AI. And then I'm in Korea. I'm doing a presentation. Long story short, the VP of the region invites me to go downstairs, look at his call center. And this is 2016.
Mhm.
And he says, and I said, well, you close 20 deals, let's say on average, right? Every person gets about 100 calls in this call center, close 20 deals. What do you do with the other 80? How do you know who to call back? How do you know who's worth calling back, who's not worth calling back, who's worth a follow-up? And I thought he was going to say good instinct, good training. And he said, no, we use natural language processing. To which I said, what? He goes, yeah, we used AI, machine learning. I said, what? And that was like, it's like in my head, I was like, oh crap, it's back, right?
Yeah.
Because it was like, I hadn't heard about AI in a while. And then I started doing the research and I was discovering everything. And in 2017, I wrote and co-authored with my friend James Anderson, Sales Ex Machina, which is how AI is transforming the world of selling, 2017, which is 7 years ago. And what was interesting, I think we published it in 2018, written in 2017, published in 2018. And if you look at that book today, I say about 90+%, maybe more, is still valid. What I didn't see coming, because around that time, 2017, that's when the paper from Google came out, Attention is All You Need, which was the foundation of all these transformers, these ChatGPTs, these OpenAI, these large language models, and the algorithms, right? So fast forward to now, we have ChatGPT was like that. It was the first time it was like, here's an application that's direct to consumer that you
Yep.
can actually use. You don't need data scientists or quants. You can just use it yourself. And people are like, oh my God, it's like Prometheus giving fire to humans. We can play with this thing. And so where it's at today, these large language models are just that, big language models. They're not very specific yet, but they're great for general research. You can use them. By the way, I don't know if you've used them for role playing. I have.
Yeah.
You can role play with the chat GPTs. You can have them role play each other and feed them different objections. It's really powerful. And so what I see is this acceleration. If you look at what's happening with companies like NVIDIA with their GPUs, their processing units, Google with their tensor processing units. So the speed is accelerating. And what we're about to see over the next 3 to 5 years is an incredible shift. It is going to be an incredible shift. I don't think people, Chris, understand. I'm like Paul Revere, saying the British are coming. I'm saying the jobless rates are coming.
Yeah.
Because I see it. I see it. And I think people don't understand that this is not the Industrial Revolution. I explained to people, so look, we were on the farm. We came off the farm, we went into the factories. There's the Industrial Revolution. What did the factories want from us? Our power, our strength, right? Our manual labor, right? Great. The information kicks in, 80s and 90s, right? We have computers now. What do they want? Oh yeah, they want our cognitive ability, our intelligence, right? Now we move into the AI revolution. Well, what do they want from us? Well, I don't know, because we don't need to apply muscle and we don't have the intelligence to compare with AI. So you're going to see a lot of jobs, especially like white collar jobs. The CEO from Stability AI, I think it's Mod Motask or something like that. He said something interesting. AI won't replace your job. People who use AI will replace you. That's kind of the mantra now. But what we're going to see over the next 3 to 5 years is an acceleration that I don't think we really understand yet. We talk about, by the way, companies are disguising this. Instead of saying we're going to fire people, they're going to say, no, we're going to improve productivity and efficiencies. Ergo, we're not going to need so many people anymore.
Yeah, of course.
And so it creates an existential crisis in the future, I think. This is my dystopian view of this. By the way, it's going to do a lot of good. In the medical industry, especially in the medical industry, you can see where this is going to be good. The problem is, what happens if you believe what Goldman Sachs says, that 18% to 20% of the population jobs will be gone, 300 million jobs, right, in the next 3 to 5 years. If you believe those numbers, which other people are saying similar numbers, what happens when the jobless rate goes up? And even if you offered people, universal basic income and give everybody money, what do they do when they don't have anything to do? They don't have, the machines are doing everything for them.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest concern now. And I know I don't mean to end this podcast on a bummer. There are some good things about AI that we're going to see, obviously, but I'm more concerned about the impact it's going to have on the job market.
Yeah.
Because it's coming for jobs, and some of the safe harbor jobs are going to be gone. Anything in front of a computer will be AI'd out, or at least reduced in terms of the number of people. What I think you will see, if I can give you a positive note, is that you're going to see an increase in apprenticeships like plumbers, HVACs, roofers, because stuff like that can't be AI'd out. And you're already starting to see an increase in those domains. People are not going to college as much. They're going to start going into these very specific apprenticeships. And if I can tie it back to sales, I also think you're going to need less salespeople. They're going to be able to do the demos. Have you seen the demos you've seen the Air.ai demo where it's making the cold call? Primal AI has their own demo where it's the sales chatbot actually selling solar panels. And people say, well, Victor, I can tell it's AI. I said, well, yeah, when the internet first came out, you can tell it was a poor internet. And I said, look at it today. So 3 to 5 years, we're going to see things that we've never seen before.
Interesting.
And And I remind people that, and this is the biggest mind shift that people should have that I think don't get. GPT, generative pre-trained transformer. Focus on the generative piece.
Yep.
And here's how it impacts the jobs. And again, if I'm being lengthy here, just cut me off. But I think this is interesting. If you get this mindset, this will scare you and maybe make you think about this. We're recording a podcast right now. You and I are the talent, right? You have a camera, I have a camera. I have a mic, you have a mic, right? We're going through this whole system called, in this case, Zoom. Eventually, somebody's like, Scott, I think, is going to do the post editing on this, or whoever's going to do the post editing, they're going to use some software, they're going to upload it to YouTube and all these other platforms, the podcast, whatever. Now, in the future, the generative piece means that when you have a question, it's going to go out and generate the video for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could already generate books, right? Like novels.
Yep.
And so think about this for a second. If it can generate everything from point A to point B, manufacturers don't need to be around as much because in other words, there's a lot of jobs that are going to be lost because the thing is generating things on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And where does that leave us as content creators? That's kind of an interesting concept also. We're not going to go away, but it'll be interesting what the future brings. And you've seen the examples of how they create movies now.
Yeah.
You just enter a script, it creates a movie. How many job losses are that? The last point here is that so Tyler Perry was building an $800 million studio. You heard this, right?
Yeah.
And he stopped because he saw OpenAI's Sora. Now, how many jobs were lost because he stopped an $800 million? Yeah. And that's kind of how I see AI. It's going to impact everything. And nobody knows how the end finishes.
Yeah. Yeah. Got my
Damn, sorry about that. You're like, damn, Victor, thank you.
I mean, I 1000%, I see that. I mean, I think like, there's gonna be, to me, it's almost like it's like the world it is today, right? Like, I mean, I don't think like even half of the general population knows what a cookie is, let alone knows that they're being tracked for their every single movement throughout the internet, right? And I think the same thing with AI. I don't think even like 80% of or 90% of the general population, outside those that are interacting with it professionally, like know what the full capabilities of it are. And they might be using it either as a student, as a teacher, or whatever. And AI right now only really works when you're prompting it. It's learning from these prompts, right? So it's learning from us. And I think like at some point, the interesting part will be like when does it have to stop learning from us? Because like it's almost like humanity's creativity will stop to a standstill at some point because AI will take over for creation, generating everything. Uh, and it's almost at that point it's going to be servicing answers based on historical or present data of what whatever is being asked of it.
What's interesting is that they're already saying that 5% of the information out there is AI generated.
Yeah.
On the internet. So if it keeps creating more and more of its own, will be its own information. But I do see a light. Can I share this? Like this will be a good way to end this. Dude, I think, first of all, you're going to see a rise of micro enterprises. And that is small companies with over $1 billion valuations with, I don't know, 5 people, right? But you're also going to see the ascendancy, I believe, of the 1099s, the independent contractors, the solopreneurs, who can now use all these tools to build something on their own without having to use a lot of resources. So I see total upside for solopreneurs, people who want to just live the 1099 life. And so maybe that's where we start winning.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just the next generation has to not be lazy and figure this shit out as quickly as possible before it becomes,
Yeah, that should be on a shirt. Figure this shit out. Yeah. Be quick about it, but figure this shit out.
I mean, it's you're either on one side, you're either as a consumer or you're creating, right? It's like you're building and you're innovating, or you're just on the consuming end. And you got to choose. I think in this race, you better pick it very quickly because it's going to go fast.
That's very profound because, you do, right? Because if you choose not to use the tools, then you're going to be the consumer.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're going to be the who is sold to. But those who are smart enough to embrace some of these tools, who just go, as you get into the breach and go, let me figure this out, will be able to build their own small little companies, little empires. I'm excited about the solopreneur world in the future.
Yeah. On that note, Victor, thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing your journey, your insights, super valuable. It was great to have you on.
Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.